What's going on, everybody? It's NJ Gloper, and we're back. Chapter 14, Sources of Power, Gary Klein. What if I started every book chapter like that? Chapter 14, The Power of the Team Mind. So we're going to learn about teams and how they work together and cooperate and think together. So if anybody feels like they have any questions or they want to talk about the book or they just want to talk about something tangentially related, feel free to request. And if I think you'll add to the conversation, I can bring you up. But let's get started. By the way, there's a little bit of background noise on this space, so just bear with me while I got planes flying overhead and Catalonians yelling. It's Friday night, you got to deal with the environment. But all right, let's get started. The power of the team mind. Team decision-making includes properties that we might never predict if we study only individuals. For example, the ability of a team to come up with ideas that are beyond the skills of any single team member. This chapter examines the concept of the team mind to explain how teams can think together. The purpose of using this concept is to force us to consider a team as an intelligent entity and to center our attention on the way the team thinks rather than on the individual team members. The concept of team mind. Usually we try to use metaphors based on phenomena that we understand well in order to help make sense of fuzzy phenomena. Computers make good metaphors. So do biological processes. But the concept of mind is a terrible metaphor, and thus a poor candidate to help us study anything. We don't know what it is, or where it is, or even if it is. And yet the mind of a team can be easier to study than the mind of an individual. Consider the types of information used to make inferences about what is going on in a person's mind. All right, so first we're probably going to get into economy in this section. I assume at some point he's going to talk about an economy or how a company thinks or how prices are, sought after and the value of things in the market. I'm sure that's going to come up at least once here. So just a small prediction. First, we infer mental activities from behavior. You can study the behavior of a team as easily as that of an individual. For example, air crews are emitting behaviors, the behaviors of their airplane. The changes in flaps, the radio calls, and the engine adjustments are all observable behaviors emitted by air crews. The first officer might change the flaps, and the captain might make the radio call, but the behaviors are the actions of the crew. Second, we infer mental processes from our own conscious experience. We see and feel things, and the contents of awareness fill and occupy our minds. This is murky and hard to bring to the surface when studying individual consciousness. Yet, there is no difficulty in studying the consciousness of a team. You just watch and listen. The matters the team talks about, even the gestures that the team members make to each other, are the contents of the team's consciousness. We can call this the collective consciousness of the team. An outside observer who is familiar with the task has clear an understanding of the collective consciousness as any of the team members. Third, we infer mental processes from activities of which a person is not aware, perhaps physiological or electrical events in the brain, or a part of a person's unconscious, to be ferreted out by interpreting dreams and Freudian slips. They can be indicated by brief facial gestures or other nonverbal signs. We have trouble making sense of these and trying to understand an individual's thinking. For the team, it is easy as interviewing the team members separately to see what they knew that they did not share with the others. We can uncover the ideas that never made it into the collective consciousness. This is the preconscious level of the team mind. Example 14.1 presents another simulated malfunction from a study we did for NASA. Example 14.1, the case of the degenerators. The B727 has 3 generators. It needs at least 2 generators to fly normally and at least 1 to fly safely. Each of the 3 engines on the 727 has its own generator. A malfunction begins early in the flight when one of the generators fails. This is not unusual or even cause for concern. But as the airplane is making its initial descent prior to landing, the oil pressure on a second engine drops to 35 psi, the borderline value for either operating the engine or shutting it down. The malfunction lets us see how the air crews would make the decision. The argument in favor of leaving the engine on is that the more engines that are available, the more power is available. The argument for shutting it down is that the engine can be damaged if used without enough oil. And if the oil pressure decreases more, the crew will have to go through the procedure for shutting it down. If that happens during the landing when everyone is already busy, it will add to the confusion and stress and reduce the margin for error. Yeah, they've already got a lot going on when they're landing. You got to account for crosswinds. You got to manipulate your speed and your angle. You have to watch for air traffic and listen to commands from air traffic control. There's a lot of stuff going on. One of the air crews we observed hits on a compromise solution, leaving the troublesome engine on standby so it is not being used, but it is available in the case they need the extra power. The decision is reached only after a lot of discussion, and as an observer, I am not sure of the status of all the engines upon landing. Afterward, when we gather the air crew for the post-flight interview, I remind them of this malfunction and ask them how many generators they had when they landed. 2, says the co-pilot, who was flying the plane when they landed. His expression shows that he is not too confident of that answer. 1.5, says the captain, meaning the one good engine plus the other one on standby. The co-pilot did not realize that it was on standby. 1, says the flight engineer, reminding the captain that it takes a minute or 2 to bring an engine back from standby, so the generator was not available when they were landing. This story seems amusing, that the 3 have different answers, except that the person with the worst answer was flying the airplane. If he had needed extra power, it would not have been available. There was disagreement between the contents of the team's preconscious and its collective consciousness. The team had failed to clarify critical information about the status of the machine, and at the conscious level had never realized that there were such different interpretations. The functions of a team mind. A team mind has the following functions. Working memory. This is the ability to hold information such as telephone numbers for brief periods of time. Applied to a team mind, information is presented and gets some discussion. Then the team moves on to another topic and forgets the first one. Long-term memory. This ability to store information permanently applies to teams as well as individuals. This was studied by Wegner in 1987. That's Wegner. Teams have to store information to retrieve later. If a team member has particular information and drops out of the team, the information is lost. According to Wegner, teams find it helpful to store the information redundantly so more than one person knows it. This is super important in organizations. You can think of the team organization as, he was still talking about this at the beginning of the chapter, analogies and how they're useful and how the mind is actually a terrible analogy in most cases. But we can go back to the computer example. Redundant information is used everywhere. When you access a YouTube video, you are not actually accessing the video from reliably a single source, depending on where you are geographically and your network conditions and your network speed, the latency you have, your bandwidth, which ISP you're connected to. You might get a different service provider. You might get a different content distribution server. We call this sharding or clustering. The same video is stored across different Google servers, different YouTube servers hosted by Google redundantly. So the same video is stored in California and New York and probably somewhere in the middle of the country, like Idaho or something. It gets stored redundantly, and that way the person in Virginia who's requesting it, maybe the New York server's overloaded. Maybe the server balancing, the network balancing will say, well, New York's under load. We're going to give the traffic to California. Even though the server in New York is closer and there's lower latency, it's under load. So it's going to be stored in California as well. It might as well redirect that traffic over there. Kind of like when Google Maps redirects you because there's traffic on some highway and it says, look, you're going to want to go around. It's going to be too slow if you go here. There's a standstill. There's like deadlock traffic. It redirects you, it reroutes you around it. That's sort of what like server load balancing is. But that redundancy of information is what allows that in the first place. The redundancy of information of the video being stored in multiple places. That would not be possible otherwise. And there's things like on-demand and real-time caching. So if the video is not available or there's a sudden demand, it can be, duplicated across different network servers, whatever. It's all crazy load balancing stuff. But yeah, long-term memory, if it's lost from a YouTube server, for some reason it goes down, it needs to be replicated. So they have backups and redundancies. But that redundancy is super important for the user experience so that you don't get this video cannot be found or the video takes way too long to load. So that exists in computers as well as humans. Humans on a team would do the same thing. Someone hears something, they write it down in a notebook. Another person might type it in their phone notes. Yet another person might just jot it down on a piece of paper, like a napkin or something, or a Post-it note, and shove it in some binder. And, you ask a question to the team, you're going to get an answer from them, but you don't know who's going to retrieve it, and what method of retrieval, what material they wrote it down on, what method of storage they use. It doesn't matter as long as it can be retrieved. So teams, computers, similar ideas here. It's a network. There's nodes in a graph. Limited attention. We can attend to only one thing at a time. Teams also can only discuss one thing at a time. They have to be careful in directing their attention to make sure that what gets the spotlight is worthwhile. Perceptual filters. Just give me a second while this stupid thing goes by. Perceptual filters. We experience the world through the sensory mechanisms that convert mechanical energy into patterns of neural activity. Similarly, teams do not have direct experience, but must depend on secondhand reports, which can introduce inaccuracies. We see this a lot with ChatGPT and large language models now. They have to rely on the prompt that is given to them, which is unreliable. It's inconsistent. It's usually missing data. It's usually poorly worded. It has spelling errors. There's punctuation missing. Someone types the wrong version of like homophones, the there problem, the to problem. There's perceptual problems with large language models. You don't always get good inputs. So secondhand information, you have to be able to transform it. You have to be able to sanitize it and error correct it. You have to be resilient and anti-fragile. You have to be able to deduce things. Learning. Teams need to learn in many ways, such as acquiring new procedures, discarding ineffective behaviors, and figuring out how to become more effective. There are many other correspondences between a team mind and an individual one, and there are dissimilarities as well, since no metaphor can be an exact match. The value of a metaphor is to help illuminate a phenomenon of interest. The value of the team mind metaphor is to put some structure on our understanding of teams to see how far we can use the findings of cognitive psychology. Let's talk about how a team mind develops. To learn how a team mind increases in ability, Marvin Thordson and I have compared some of the teams we have studied. We contrasted the best and the worst teams. Example 14.2. The best teams. Wildland firefighters. The U.S. Forest Service is responsible for handling forest fires. It uses an incident command structure that is similar to the one used by the military. The incident commander is supported by a staff of specialists in planning, operations, logistics, personnel, and so forth. So like a presidential cabinet. There's always hierarchies to these things. There's never just one guy running the whole show. He's always got subordinates. He's always got assistants. There was always a king's hand. It's never just one guy. Marvin Thordson was on location during a forest fire in Idaho, a large one that covered 6 mountains. He watched the command staff assemble a team of 4,000 firefighters, drawing them from all over the country. They put together a working organization in only a few days and sent them out to fight the fire. It's hard to manage an intact organization of 4,000 people, to give directions and make policies, even in stable and safe bureaucratic settings. Here, in less than a week, they were building the organization and trusting it enough to risk lives. Why are they so good? Experience. They get lots and lots of experience. There are always fires to be fought. We read only about the dramatic ones, but Idaho alone can count on many fires each season. Unlike the military, which does not fight many wars and has to rely on training to keep sharp, the people fighting forest fires have plenty of firsthand experience. So each member of the team is getting their own experience. Everyone involved is sharing the experience. I'm prefiguring what he's about to say. I'm like reaching out and seeing what he might be writing just a few paragraphs ahead. Furthermore, they're fighting an adversary that does not change tactics or add new weapons, so the experience gained one year applies to the next. The members of the top command and control echelons have decades of experience. Sharpness. Some members of the strike team fight forest fires 12 months per year. They work the western states during the summer and fall, and then travel to Australia and New Zealand to catch the summer and fall fire seasons down there. The rest of the team is engaged in firefighting in the United States for 6 months each year. Stability. The members of each core incident command team work side by side every fire season for decades. This stands in contrast to a military system where soldiers rotate assignments every few years. Promotion from within. Everyone starts at the bottom. Everyone has moved up through the ranks. The lowest crew members realize that their leaders have been in their boots and know what it will feel like to carry out the orders that they give. This understanding adds to confidence, since the line crews appreciate that their leaders are more skilled and competent than they are. That sounds like a gang. That sounds like a street gang. Everyone starts out running the corner, just, selling dime bags. Everyone starts selling keys of Coke, getting the bigger guys out for the larger deals, just sharing whispers, making sure that everybody's where they're supposed to be, like providing tips and, snitching on the other guys, giving intel, doing gopher stuff, like just go grab this, go take this there. They all start from the bottom and they work their way up. They've seen the same block. They've worked in the same area. They know the same city. They've fought against the same people. They have the same ops. So it's kind of similar, Networks. This is a closely knit community. Many commanders and their staff members have worked together before, even the ones from different states who may have joined forces on large-scale fires in the past. Together, all of these factors resulted in a calm and competent team. Despite the complexity of assembling a large force overnight, the commanders and planners had done it before, even if on a smaller scale. The different team members knew their assignments, and actions were taken smoothly and purposely. Excuse me, let me get a drink here. My mouth's quite dry. There was not much wasted energy. The tough decisions they had to face were ones they had faced in the past. And for example, a common decision was where to set up a fire. Break a bold, what is this? Bad formatting. It's really hard to read. Where to set up a fire. Break a bulldozed semicircle in advance of a fire designed to stop a fire. But okay, that's crazy. I don't know what that means. There's like 10 words joined together. I don't know where each word ends or starts. That's messed up. I'm just going to continue. The temptation is to draw this tightly around the leading edge of the fire because the smaller the fire break, the faster it can be built. The disadvantage is that the smaller it is, the greater the risk. If the wind shifts, the fire can slide by and the team has wasted its time. These kinds of decisions are made quickly, using fragmentary information about terrain, weather, characteristics of the wood, extent of underbrush, competence of the bulldozer operators, and so forth. The command staff met twice a day to make the difficult decisions. After years of working together, the team members knew how to plan together. They didn't waste time on politeness, and their egos were strong enough to take criticism without bristling. They were also sensitive to issues of morale. Someone who disagreed with the commander's action would confront the commander in the meeting only if it was necessary. Otherwise, the disagreement would be expressed in private. They did not want to waste staff time on lower priority fights or create a feeling of divisiveness. This is like the classic right-wing trope of like infighting. The one where it's like everyone is disagreeing about religion, what kind of tax system we should have, whether we should have an immigration policy that favors high-skilled labor versus low-skilled labor, or none at all. What's the deportation task force going to look like? Who's allowed in the ethno-state? It's this kind of stuff. It goes on, and it purity spirals, and it gets crazy. And that's how you get a million fractions. Like during the alt-right, there was like 10,000 different organizations, different media groups, and shock troops, like the Patriot Front versus what's the other guy? I don't even know. There's just too many of them. Whatever. It's neither here nor there, okay? But the idea of divisiveness, the fracturing, it's unnecessary. And these guys, they've been a team for so long that all of that stuff is secondary to the objective. There's no time for that. It's all about morale. It's all about camaraderie. It's all about the mission. And that's why they're the best. That's why they can react in a random situation, a rapidly changing situation. I think about the AFPAC 4 in Detroit and how it was on short notice canceled because the venue deliberately canceled last minute. And everyone regrouped. And there was this kind of, what would you call it? Emergent leadership. It kind of arose from nothing. There wasn't any explicit orders. The leadership was kind of struggling to figure out what to do in the wake of a total catastrophe, in the sense that this conference that was supposed to go on got canceled the night before. Like what a disaster that could have been. But the team, the team members, the team mind, they had enough experience together. They had enough experience in the field together to know what a rally looked like. They'd seen TPUSA speeches. They'd seen people give speeches, and this would be different if you can think of a pep rally and the way that high schoolers carry out like a pep rally. It's like one thing versus a political debate. That's another gathering, like a social gathering where people are debating political ideas or trying to you know, make it known to the public. A debate is about the audience. It's about trying to win over the audience. It's not really particularly about owning your opponent. I mean, that's part of it, but the other part is the audience. So the pep rallies and the debates, they don't have, it's not a perfect overlap, but there's a Venn diagram where you're speaking to an audience, and these things add together to an experience. They both give you experience in the field of public speaking and directing an audience and trying to influence an audience and their mind and try and capture their attention and make some kind of statement, make some kind of proclamation. And those things have an overlap in the space of trying to get, probably what, 3,000, 2,000 or 3,000 potential groypers out in force in Detroit together, all organically emergent in an emergent environment, rapidly changing environment. How many places, how many hotels was everybody getting kicked out of? How many restaurants were refusing service because they saw people in suits and ties with the with the American flag lapel and the blue hats? It's like it was amazing actually that anything came from that. And that's why Nick said he was so excited to see everybody come together. He was shocked, but also he felt deeply moved by it. So that's something that only a true team can pull off. And you can agree or disagree about the different parts of the team, whether you agree with one individual or one team member. That's neither here nor there. That's what he's talking about here. He's talking about the feeling of divisiveness that doesn't exist among true experts. And the best experts, which were the fireground commanders, they didn't have time for that. It was all about the morale. It was all about the mission. It was all about the situation and trying to make the best of it. Not going against any commander and taking any problem with them up privately. Resolving the issues later or behind closed doors instead of airing out everybody's dirty laundry in front of the whole team. So there's a lot going on there. There's a lot to unpack. I'm glad I thought of that because that is pretty appropriate. But yeah, what kind of team are we? What kind of team can we assemble? What kind of experience can we gain? How do we get more experience? How do we get people into more leadership positions? How do we get them leveled up? How do we make sure that the next cancellation goes even better next time? I'm sure that, of course, another motorcycle. I'm sure that people who were at AFPAC 4 would be more prepared for an event like this next time. So that's the experience that the whole team shared for that one. So just some real world analogies, just some metaphors, just some, we're just, using the real world as the model and modeling off of the real world. Not everything has to be theoretical all the time. So we can just look back to our own lives and our experiences and draw upon that. We have the primary source. We were there, okay? We know what it was like. There was another characteristic that helped their teamwork, their expectation that they would be working together for years to come. In the midst of fighting fires, they were also conducting on-the-job training. They were aware of opportunities for providing new challenges to different people to help them grow in skill. Rather than remove someone doing a poor job, they tried to find an alternate responsibility from which the person could learn. This was part of their culture, ensuring continuity by developing the skills of their successors. Compare these teams to the worst ones we had observed, crisis management teams. Typically, a manufacturing company handling dangerous materials will set up a crisis management team to prepare for emergencies, fires, explosions, and even terrorist attacks. Marvin and I observed several of these teams established by companies manufacturing nuclear weapons. These efforts were sponsored by the Department of Energy. We observed these teams during training exercises, and we were surprised by their incompetence. Keep in mind that this is in Israeli observing Department of Energy crisis management teams. How interesting that, foreigners, people with dual allegiances are allowed so close to our nuclear programs. Fissile materials. You wonder how that stuff gets lost. You wonder how it gets shipped off. I think it was the Operation Apollo, the Apollo plot or something, whatever it is. One of you guys can correct me in the comments. We observed these teams during training exercises, and we were surprised by their incompetence. One reason that crisis management teams fall apart is that the heads of these teams have to be the corporate executives because they're the ones who are legally responsible. Yeah, so there goes lawfare. Lawfare rotting the core of all of our crisis management teams. This is what the bureaucracy does to you. This is what lawfare does to a brother. But these executives have no background in crisis management. They might go through a 1 to 2 day crisis training exercise a few times per year. During the exercise, they're still learning their basic tasks. The companies do have a director of security, but that person often has low status because the function is a drain on profits. Dude, come on, man. We're talking about crisis management and they're talking about profits. They're relating status to profits. Do you see how thoroughly rotted our country is on every level? It's a shame. Besides, there are few emergencies. In some industries, the security officer knows that the chance of a single emergency during a 20-year career is less than 50%. Example 14.3, the reaction time of a crisis management team. The training scenario is that some right-wing terrorists have infiltrated a plant that manufactures nuclear materials and are holding some secretaries hostage. Wow, it's only the right wing, huh? That's the training scenario? Tells you a lot. Okay, tells you a lot. Tells you a lot about what people think. Tells you a lot what about people think is normal. What's normative. But that's kind of good because who really does wield the power? Who really does stand as a threat to the state in any meaningful way? Think about that for a second. Who, if you want to talk about a Jungian shadow, you gotta adopt the right-wing narrative. You gotta frame things in a left versus right-wing frame. And only the right wing casts a shadow. The establishment only fears a right wing. Like, does it have to be spelled out for everybody that leftism and liberalism is totally toothless? It's completely defanged entire organizations, entire governments. Look at Britain right now. It's a joke. So back to our training scenario. The crisis manager is worried that this is a diversion as other terrorists break into Sector H, where nuclear materials are stored. Therefore, he tells his director of security to make sure the number of guards there is doubled. Later, the crisis management team receives word that the terrorists have just invaded Sector H. The crisis manager is furious. He complains that the training exercise is unrealistic. He has just given the order to increase security, and it had no effect. As I review my notes on the exercise, I see that the crisis manager issued his order 31 minutes before receiving the message that Sector 8 had been invaded. I mentally review the chain of events. It begins with the manager issuing the order. Relaying the order to the people at Sector H takes maybe 10 minutes. The security director has to get through on the busy telephones. The guard on duty has to locate the unit chief and get him on the telephone. The order is communicated, but they may have other things to talk about. For example, the Sector 8 security chief will want a quick briefing on the hostage situation. So it is a minimum of 10 minutes before the Sector H security chief starts to carry out the order. And how long does that take? He cannot double his force by asking the people to clone themselves. He has to make more telephone calls to line up the extra staff and determine where the low priority areas are to draw from, call people at their homes. Then he has to arrange the transportation to bring everyone over to Sector H. He might even need route planning if he is worried about ambushes by terrorists. It might take 2 hours to double the staff, and probably more. Are you guys writing this all down? Are you guys getting this? Are you guys making your own plans? Okay, I'm just kidding. Just kidding, okay? This is a training exercise, okay? This is a totally hypothetical situation, so that was a joke. If he is worried about ambushes by terrorists, it might take 2 hours to double the staff, and probably more. Finally, the terrorists attack Sector H. This is a dangerous situation, so only when there is a free moment will anyone pick up the telephone to call headquarters. Now add another 5 to 10 minutes from the start of the terrorist attack in Sector H until the phone call is made. What does that add up to? It's at least a few hours. Yet, the crisis manager is amazed that his orders hadn't been obeyed 31 minutes later. He complains that it is a flaw in the exercise. He clearly doesn't know how long it takes to carry out an order, such as the one he gave. He doesn't know the reaction time of his own team. So when we talk, and this is me, I'm not reading, when we talk about the rot, the complete decimation of all of our institutions, the breakdown of our society, yes, it is a weakness. Yes, it makes our country weak. Yes, it makes our nation defenseless in many ways. But it also gives the successors to the state a huge advantage. It gives the people who stand to gain a lot from a weak state a huge advantage. It gives us the disadvantage of being a toothless, declining state where all of our institutions are led by crisis managers who are constantly under threat of lawfare, where the bureaucracy is actually, they wield more power than the guy who's overseeing the crisis management of fissile nuclear weapons. But that blade cuts both ways. So think about that. If the institutions are totally rotted and they have completely degraded to the point where they're almost useless, does that give someone else an upper hand? Does that let someone else make plans? Machinations? This incident is reminiscent of an infant who reaches for a slowly bouncing ball. The infant reaches for the ball, but the reaction time is so slow, but by the time that the child gets to where the ball was, the ball has moved past. So the infant reaches again, aiming directly at the point where he or she sees the ball, again not taking reaction time into account. And again, the ball has moved before the infant's hand gets there. This is challenging to infants. It's amusing to their parents. This is not a game of catch, but a different game, a precursor that enables the infant to learn his or her own reaction time, to learn how long it takes to get the hand out. The crisis management team also did not know its own reaction time. Consequently, it was trying to control events inside the time horizon for responding. We saw other problems with reaction time in this crisis management team. They tried to micromanage events in Sector H, relying on photographs showing the terrorists. Again, they ignored the time lag in taking and sending the photographs, and the time lag in deliberating about actions and issuing orders. The team was trying to direct the security forces in Sector H using photographs rather than leaving these decisions to the people on the spot. These problems compounded. Before long, the crisis management team had done such a poor job that the exercise controller had to replace the crisis manager to prevent the team from becoming totally demoralized. The development of team decision making. Building on the metaphor of a team mind, Klein, Zambach, and Thordson in 1993 identified 4 features of child development to map onto teams. The development of competencies, identity, cognitive skills, and metacognition. Figure 14.1 presents these 4 features. It also provides a set of questions that we have found useful in appraising different teams for the degree to which they have matured along these 4 dimensions. We have found it useful to apply this framework in assessing teams. Team competencies. Newborns have few competencies beyond their reflexes. In time, they learn to use their arms and fingers and all the rest automatically. They learn how to grasp objects and push other objects away and scoot back in a car seat to let their parents strap them in. Teams too are limited by the competencies of their members. Any evaluation of what to expect from a team must consider the individual levels of skill, particularly if the team members keep changing. Everyone is trying to gauge the level of competency of their other team members. Teams also rely on shared practices and routines. Mature teams are supposed to be automatic in performing their basic procedures. Team identity. A newborn does not know where it ends and the rest of the world begins. It doesn't know it has arms. It sees finger-shaped objects drift in front of its face and doesn't know that it can take direct control of them. Similarly, the immature teams we have watched lack a sense of what they control. The team members themselves are still learning how to do their individual jobs. The advanced teams have already worked this out. The team members think of the team's requirements as much as their own. If you try to explain to people on an immature team what the overall goals are, they are likely to respond, "Don't bother me with that. Just tell me what you want me to do and let me do my job." In contrast, the members of experienced teams want to know as much as possible about the overall status of the team. They realize that they may have to compensate for others, ask for help, or pitch in for team goals, even if they have to abandon their own tasks temporarily. Experienced teams have integrated identities. The members identify themselves in relationship to the whole team. Inexperienced teams have fragmentary identities and focus on individual assignments more than team requirements. Identity develops slowly. The team members have to learn their own jobs. Then they have to understand something about the jobs their teammates are doing. Then they have to develop more automatic ways of coordinating and working together. Finally, when they have the basics down, they can free up attention to see the challenges facing the team as a whole. Even when the team members are experienced and have worked on other teams, it still takes time to learn everyone's characteristics. Team identity continues to grow for a long time. When teams have not developed sufficient identity, they are confused about roles and functions, about who is responsible for what. Some team members tune out, letting others carry the load. Some interesting fact, this is the Pareto principle, or a Pareto distribution at work. This is a direct example of one of these. About 10% of any company, 10% of the workforce of any company does 80% of the work, 80 to 90% of the work. And that's fractal. That's like a fractal pattern. So if you take 1,000 employees, 10% of those employees, so 100 of them, do 90% of the work. And if you take a fraction of those employees, you go down deeper, one layer, that means that 10 of the employees do 90% of the work of those 100 employees. So there's a very small concentration of work being done, meaningful work being done by any group in any organization. And that's just true. So in a 1,000 person organization, about 80% of the work is being done by about 10 people. Now, that's not an exact number. That doesn't mean that those 10 individuals are always doing, 80% of the work. But generally speaking, that is the case. And that means that like 990 employees are doing what, 10% of the work? I don't know. Everybody's got their windows down blasting music because it's really nice out right now. I guess I can't complain. But yeah, so keep that in mind. The next time you look at your coworker and you're busting your ass, they're probably, like, statistically speaking, they're probably doing nothing. They're probably doing nothing. Like, straight up, they're doing nothing. You can count on it. You can just like flip a coin and the odds are in your favor to be doing more work than them. So always shit on your always shit on your coworkers when they're doing nothing. Always shit on them. Always be the one that's like, "Yeah, man, the fuck are you doing? You're doing nothing today, man." Anyways, where was I? Who was responsible? Yeah, some team members tune out, letting others carry the load. Yeah, that's par for the course. That's what they do best. Some may be insensitive to the needs of others, as when one person struggles with no help from others. In an exercise with a crisis management team, the security director and 2 assistants are greatly overloaded. Ooh, look who we have here. Look who we have here. We have a wild chief Trumpster. Do I pause the space? Do I pause the space? We can pause the space if he wants to request and come up. We can yeah. He just requested. All right. Let's bring him up. Very appropriate that it's a team focused chapter and we got the squad here. We got Chief Trumpster. So, Chief, what's on your mind, man? What are you thinking about? What do you got to say?
Well, I just want to say that you can't end the space now. Now that I'm here, you can never end it. It has to keep going forever and ever.
It's going to go on, okay? It's going to be a marathon.
Yeah. Ron going, you see, because you're reading it, I request, I was like, I don't know if I want to interrupt this and tell you can't end the space forever, but this is not as appropriate.
Look, I do it to myself. I let you up here, man. That's. But how are you, man? I'm always down to interrupt. I don't even care. This is going to be part of the replay. I don't even give a shit.
I'm doing well. Busy day. I've been doing some work. Very big project for next week. Lots of very big stuff will be happening then, so stay tuned. But yeah, things are going pretty well. How about you?
Good, man. Busy as ever. I've been trying to figure out for the last week which book to read next, and I've got it down to 2, and one of them is about. I'll gauge your reaction. I'll just see if you like the book that I have. My gut instinct tells me that I should do this one first, right? I'm going to run this by you. So the book is called Private Truths, Public Lies. So it's all about people's inner monologues, and it's about the lies that we tell other people, but like we secretly like resent people, or we secretly dislike things, but we have to like save face. We have to like say that you know what, this food is pretty good. You cooked a good meal, and when it's like terrible, when your girlfriend like burns the food. Incel, by the way, but your girlfriend burns the food, and it's like, yeah, honey, this is great. Yeah. Private truths, public lies. What do you think about that? Does that sound like a good topic?
It does. Does it go into the psyche of someone and how they interpret or perceive their environment to react in a certain way? Does it go into the depths of like how an individual might be a bit more inclined to tell a lie to please someone else?
Yeah. Like, and what causes people to lie? Like, what are the root causes of that? Is it like a social pressure? Is it like traditional? Is it like, Is this something that only friends do? Do people do this to their bosses? Who's lying to you? Like maybe you want to know all these questions. So I'm interested. I kind of want to read the book.
That's not interesting. I mean, it probably goes to morality, and if people prescribe to these, well, it depends on the author prescribes the idea of humans wanting to inherently like do good and what they'll do to get that end result, right? It goes
Yeah.
into, I mean, you go into the whole philosophy of whether or not someone is, if all humans are moral or morally just, if the author has that opinion, or they can go into environmental factors and say that depending on the media they consume and the family upbringing and their religion and other types of environmental factors, how, and maybe even if it goes into brains and the way the brain is shaped or molded depending on race or
Whoa, whoa,
whatever. Yeah,
whoa!
we can go into a
Jared
whole bunch
Taylor
of,
moment.
yeah. Well, it depends honestly on like what on how far the author goes, but I mean, yeah, that sounds very interesting.
Yeah, I'm thinking that's going to be the top choice, the other choice, and I just remember the title. I'll see what you think about this one, and then I can let you go. You know, you can just listen. You can just sit back and relax. I know you're always making content, so I know I got to put on the show. I got to shuck and jive. I'm over here making content. I'm dancing like a monkey, okay? But the other book is Relentless Strike, and that's about the I want to say the global war on terror, and it's all about the techniques and the training that led to our complete overwhelming. I might be Desert Storm. Sorry, it's the complete overwhelming force that we had in the Iraq, I guess, war and the Desert Storm operations, the Air Force, the air war and the ground war, and the invasion, the ground invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. That one sounds good because all of the things we learn about in these two books, Thinking Fast and Slow and Sources of Power, all of this stuff was brand new. It was like groundbreaking studies in their early and late 90s. And that's when Desert Storm happened. So they were like starting to roll out all these like psychological techniques for the teams and for individual members. And he goes into detail how they implement that into the military structure. So that could be cool. That could be interesting. It's like a direct, you know, correlation to the two books that I'm reading. It's like obvious next step. But if I want to change pace, I can do the other one. So I don't know. I got to see what you think.
Well, I think that well, that's interesting. You talk about the studies all kind of being started or implemented as soon as these big conflicts happen. I think that's very interesting. I think with the Desert Storm topic, you can probably see if those tactics, I mean, I'm not sure if it has the commentary about how Desert Storm applies to modern warfare, or if it's something where they look back at how exactly the force, the tactics of the soldiers back in the 90s and how it is changed or how it's staying the same for the modern war on terror or the modern, the modern, I guess modern tactics in general. I'm not sure how far it goes in commentary, but it sounds very interesting if you're into history and learning about that saga. But yeah, I think the psychology one is unique about how people perceive things and kind of understanding how a person thinks or rationalizes telling a lie or trying to go and the motive behind that lie, if it's for malicious purposes or if it's to make someone feel better or for themselves to feel better, and how they gauge that with something else, or how they gauge that with like morality and what they feel is right compared to what is right. But that sounds very intriguing. I think those are good books.
All right. So it sounds like both of us are leaning towards the psychology one.
Yeah.
I'm I'm more interested in the psychology. So I think I might try and read that one. It's like 400 pages. I don't know how long Relentless Strike is, but I one thing I've been doing is I've been like 100%ing. I've been doing like 100% completion of each of these books, and just I might just go through and find the interesting chapters of some of these books going forward. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I think it would be a radical departure to read a book that's not 100% psychology if I read Relentless Strike. So it would be like real chapters. It wouldn't be like how to apply this to your own life. It'd be like memoirs and uh, it's this guy's firsthand experience. So that would be a radical departure. It'd be very different. So yeah, we might have to stick to the psychology. We might have to see why people lie, if it's to be polite or if it's cultural or if it's like something deeply innate in the fallen man.
Well, it also depends on the lie itself, right? If people, if let's say if someone believes that I hate the term white lie, but if someone says, "Oh, I told a lie because because it's better to do so than tell the truth." I mean, how I'm not sure how far it goes into analyzing the type of lie it is, and saying, well, for a lie that's for personal self gain or for a negative reason, and compare it to a white lie where it is a lie, but it's in pursuit of either someone else's well being or or a better outcome for both parties.
Yeah, yeah.
Kind of see how that goes.
Yeah, like we always talk about this. This is like a huge political topic. The issue of do we release the JFK assassination documents? Do we release the 9/11 documents? Is it lying by omission to keep those documents classified? Do the people have a right to know about their own government? And what kind of secrets would that reveal? What kind of national security secrets would that reveal? And what kind of sentiment would the public have after the information is revealed to them? So yeah, it's
Well,
like do you tell them? Like there's
well,
a moral dilemma.
a government has well the thing is the government isn't really a person, it's an entity. It's not like an individual that can choose right from wrong. It's a large machine with many people that all go towards a agenda they all share, or most of them share, and if those who don't share speak up, they get fired or let go. I mean, a government, their whole purpose isn't for morality. It's essentially for their own, it should be for their own country. Unfortunately, it's not that way with with our government. But regardless, I think that with a let's say they release it. Let's say there's a classified strike they did in Yemen or in some other region in the world, and people are talking about how there's a video of something going on that linked to the United States. And do they say, well, transparency wise, we should release what we know about this and clear our image, or do they do something more shady and sly and they're cover it up or whatever? I mean, a government usually doesn't. They'll opt in transparency, not because, um, I guess just because they really wouldn't want the public to get more information because knowledge is power in a sense. And if you give them the masses too much knowledge or power over
Yeah,
their,
yeah.
their own
That's
like
Straussian, baby. That's Straussian. You sounded like Leo Strauss right now. The scholar and the gentleman and the philosopher king.
right. Well, all I'll say is I think that a government, if they were to give all the power to the people, they would they would lose their own dominion and their own power over the masses, and
Yeah.
they don't want that, regardless if it's for a good or a bad cause, whether it's a justified strike or not. Does the government want to? The right word maybe is not sabotage, but I guess hijack or no, there's a different word for it, but to kind of reduce their own power and their own authority over the masses or over their own
Yeah, they would
state.
be subverting themselves in many cases. I totally get what you mean. Yeah. Like there's a power hierarchy. There's a disproportionate amount of power in the government, obviously, or else the government wouldn't have power over its people. And that's necessary. Yeah, the government obviously should have more power than a random person or any group under the government. So yeah, what like, I wonder if it gets into all that. Like it has to, right?
Yeah, and I would be interested to see if you had like that combination of the psyche of how people lie and what well, I guess why people lie. If that happens, we can also maybe even see how information is has evolved over the years and how governments weaponize that information for their own purpose or their own cause. And to kind of see how lies possibly that we conceive or how lies are told, how that applies with the government and how they actually put things out or how they spread disinformation to achieve their goals.
It's the information war. Alex Jones was right. Alex Jones was right
Yeah,
again. Okay.
for real. but it all is information war. Everything you see is propaganda. You know, I mean, like you can look at your phone. Anything you see that's an advertisement, it's there because they have a social profile of you. They have all of your data. You give it willingly to third parties or through big tech platforms. They give it to third party platforms, other governments that buy it back from these third parties, and yeah, you have a whole social profile. That's why they know like what font color you like, what style of font you like, the placement of the font on the advertisements. They can go and really get to what your interests are, which is why the whole push for AI and this whole, the acceleration of that, it's not because of, it's not so much to take the progress of the technology, but the data we're giving to it. We're feeding it so much data, it's actually crazy how fast it's learning because of all of the billions and billions of bits of information we just started willingly feeding it about all of us. So, it's a combination of those factors, but yeah, it all comes together actually. If you look at it from the larger side or the zoomed out lens.
And that dovetails with the chapter I'm reading now. It's the knowledge of teams. It's the power of the team mind. Damn. How do we always bring it back, man? We're just too good at this.
Yeah. Well, hey, I don't want to hide. I don't want to hijack your space too much longer.
No, no,
Let's
you're
find
good,
out.
man. And one more question for you. Who do you know this Tuwanga guy that's requested? Do you know him?
I don't know. I know I don't know him. No, I think he follows me, but I don't know who he is.
All right, all right. He's a new face here, so I don't know if I
Oh,
should let him speak. He's a
well,
total unknown.
I'll leave that judgment to you. But yeah, I just want to hop up here and tell you can't end the space. Now that I'm listening, you can't end it. So
I've
this
been
is gonna be
entrusted
forever.
with the marathon. I have to keep it going.
All right.
All right, Chief, pass me the torch. I got to keep running. It's like the Olympics. It's like the relay. So
Yeah.
thanks for coming up, Chief. I'm glad you came up to talk. That was good.
Yeah. Good talking to you as always. All right. See you later.
As always, man. Catch you later. All right. So you guys will hopefully you enjoyed that. That's some extra content. That's some free content from Chief. He's always making content. You guys are lucky. You guys are blessed. You don't know how good you have it. Okay. Back to chapter 14 of Sources of Power. Okay, we're just reading a book here. It's pretty boring. If any of you guys want to come up to speak, if you think you'll add to the conversation, I can bring you up. Just it's a gentle reminder that the replays go up on YouTube. So we have a strict dress code. We have a social dress code here. So I don't just bring anybody up. There's a little bit of hygiene going on. So I don't just bring anybody off the street into my house. I don't bring anybody I don't know on Twitter up to speak. So maybe if I know you, if you can get someone to vouch for you, I can bring you up. But anyways, we're going to get back to the book. But let's continue. The power of the team mind. Excuse me. When teams have not developed sufficient identity, their leaders can be diverted by low-level tasks without understanding what can happen when they let the responsibilities go. For an illustration of micromanagement, we again turn to the crisis management teams. Example 14.4, the crisis manager who became less than a secretary. The company had just installed a new center filled with computers, command desks, and other paraphernalia. They were conducting their first training exercise in this facility. The crisis manager sat at the head of the table with the 4 staff members in charge of security, operations, and the like. In the middle of the exercise, he got an idea that he wanted to put into action immediately and dramatically. He made his own phone calls to arrange for support helicopters from a nearby U.S. Air Force base. He did not tell anyone what he was doing. Instead, he left the head table and went over to where a secretary was sitting and entering messages into the computer system to notify everyone of key events. He wrote out his own message describing the helicopters and handed it to the secretary. Then he stood behind her, proofreading to catch her typographical errors. The crisis manager wasn't at his post, making himself available to members of his team who needed help. He wasn't even a secretary, entering his own messages. He was a secretary's assistant for the length of time it took to type and revise his message. Yeah, this is mismanagement. This is classic micromanagement, mismanagement. Not good. Experienced teams have seen instances where roles and functions have broken down, and they know the consequences. One fireground commander working in an urban setting told us about a milk box he brought with them to fires. He explained that when he first became a commander, he was prone to rushing about to offer help, dashing into buildings to assist with rescues, and being an all around resource. Of course, whenever he left his post, his crew members did not know where to find him if they needed a decision made, and they wasted time searching for him. Gradually, it dawned on him what it meant to be in charge and what his responsibilities actually were. He knew about his impulsive nature, so he made it a practice to bring the milk box to serve as his station, and there he stayed. He sat on it, stood on it, kept a foot touching it, remained within sight of it. He had realized the functions he served for his team and where he fit into the jobs of everyone else. Team cognition. A few primary questions can be used to distinguish teams with high and low conceptual levels. The first is, how do the teams describe their goals and intents? The answer was covered in Chapter 13. Second, to what degree does the team share an understanding of the situation? This can include giving team members a chance to voice divergent views, as well as pulling these ideas together so the members know the assumptions guiding their actions. Some teams take extra steps to keep the members informed as the situation changes. A third category is the time horizon. How much effort does a team make to look ahead and anticipate problems? Some teams focus on events too close in for them to affect. Example 14.3 on the reaction time of a crisis management team shows what happens to those who follow events rather than prepare for them. Yeah, are you chasing the ball or are you getting ahead of it? I can't tell you how many times I used to play baseball, and they always tell you when you're out in the field, get ahead of the ball, get ahead of the ball, all the time. If you're ever playing shortstop, it's about getting ahead of the ball, first and foremost. Get under the ball, get ahead of the ball, all the time. You just hear this over and over and over again until it's muscle memory, until it's second nature. You see the ball and you're just already like locating yourself underneath of it. You're already trying to move yourself underneath the ball. You're measuring its speed and trajectory, and you're just moving your legs to get right under it. Then you get better at coordinating, and you're saying like, well, am I going to bump into anybody? Then you get better and you can see based on the lighting conditions and the field conditions, whether you can make it there in time or if you should just be sprinting to get to the ball where it's going to roll to, because you know you can't run faster than the ball. You think it's going to be over you. It's going to go over your head. There's all these calculations you can make in split seconds, and it's all about getting ahead of the ball. It's about trying to be where the ball's going to be, not where it was, not where you think it's going to be. It's where is it actually going to be? Very important. Sports Groiper would love this. Fourth, how does the team manage uncertainty, keeping track of gaps and ambiguities? Because the windows of opportunity will close if a team waits to get every last bit of information, good teams must live with uncertainty. At the same time, they have to be sensitive to the assumptions and guesses they have been making in case these turn out to be wrong. Thus far, we have been concentrating on planning teams. When the plans are executed, the team's priorities shift. Now the team needs everyone to have the same overriding goals and to make sure members share the same understanding of the situation. Recognizing a situation is important, and teams have to work to communicate this recognition, to achieve a shared understanding. Situation awareness incorporates the nature of the goals, and teams have to work to communicate intent. It also highlights critical cues. Teams have to ensure that the right members are searching for these cues and interpreting and communicating them. They also have to make sure some members are looking ahead while others are carrying out the plans. Everyone can't always be glued to the screen. You can think about if you're the captain of a ship, not all of the crew members can be looking out over the bay. They can't be looking out over the water to see where they're headed. They can't be seeing if they're going to be turning left or right next, or if they have the room to go, or what their ship speed is. They can't go look at the weather conditions and see if it's going to be choppy. There's only so many people that can be doing that at once. Other people have to be running the engines. Other people have to be manning the rotors and the wheel. Other people have to be serving food. There's people who have to be maintaining the ship's communications. There's people who have to run the staff of the ship to make sure everyone's, doing what they're supposed to be doing. So there's like this meta awareness. There's so much that needs to be done in teams. Everyone can't be doing the same thing. If you watch, here's another sports analogy, if sports gripers listening. If you've ever watched like very young kids, like 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds play soccer or any sport that involves a ball, all they do is bunch up around the ball. They're all going for the same thing. They haven't specialized yet. There's no concept of, should I be helping the goalie? Should I be going where the ball might head to? Should I be acting as a striker, or should I be playing defense? Should I be falling back? There's none of that. None of that is in consideration. It's all about, how can I get close to the ball? How can I kick the ball? I need the ball to go over there. Everyone has the same goal, and it's the same, like, very shallow goal of, I need to score. And that's what it looks like. A lot of coaches call it bumblebee soccer or whatever. So it's very limited. It's very shallow goal seeking. We need to specialize. We all need to have our own goals, but also be aware of other people's goals and how they interact. It's like a cognition of the other members of the team. Oh, wow. I just jumped right into the next part. Team metacognition. Here we go. Metacognition refers to the concept of thinking about thinking. It emerged from research with children to describe how they learn to take their own thinking strategies into account. They learn the limits of their memory and acquire strategies for working around these limits, such as knowing when to reread something because they are not sure they understood it. Children cannot develop good skills for metacognition until their behaviors become sufficiently stable and predictable for them to anticipate what will happen and take the necessary steps. Metacognition depends on a clear identity. For teams as well as individuals, metacognition is an important development. A team can learn its own capabilities and acquire a strong identity and a shared understanding of the situation. Once this awareness is in place, the team can monitor its own performance and select strategies to avoid weaknesses and capitalize on strengths. This is all about knowing where you are. This is about knowing where you are in relation to others and your own abilities. One of the pleasures of watching a child grow up is to see the child learn to handle ideas and juggle different concepts. A critical aspect of a child's cognitive development is to manage the flow of ideas. The same holds for teams. The ability to manage the flow of ideas is one of the central skills that distinguishes immature from experienced teams. Members of an immature team may struggle to come up with any ideas, and often the ideas take the team in all sorts of directions, some useful, some completely irrelevant. Time winds down, and too quickly the team has to make sense of everything that was said. The team members are so excited to tell everything they know that they do not pay attention to whether their comments fit into their task. Experienced teams are more careful. They try to build on the comments of others and create linkages all along. They bring up new perspectives where appropriate, but are cautious about going off on tangents. During a team decision-making session, the ideas have to be managed. Too few, and the product is disappointing. Too many, and the team is overwhelmed. This is the power of the team mind, to create new and unexpected solutions, options, and interpretations, drawing on the experience of all the team members to generate products that are beyond the capabilities of any single individual. What makes the process so difficult is that no one knows in advance which ideas will be put forth and how they will coalesce. No one, not even the leader, knows what is in everyone's head. No one can be sure of which suggestions or experiences team members will offer. The team's ideas depend on who shows up that day, who is feeling alert and who is sleepy, who is prepared and who is distracted, which ideas any of the team members articulate, the orders of these ideas, and the ways the ideas are combined. Any session could go in different directions if different ideas are voiced or are joined in different ways. The team can try to manage the flow of ideas to keep them coherent and linked. But even a good planning team would have some difficulty managing the flow of ideas since no one knows in advance what is going to come out. It's not enough to be aware of strengths and weaknesses. A team has to change its approach if it sees itself running into difficulties. Consider the following example from an interview of the incident commander of a very large forest fire in Northern California. Example 14.5. The firefighters who realized they weren't supposed to fight fires. The fire, at an order of magnitude greater than anyone had ever seen, is entirely out of control. The commanders pull in all kinds of fire crews, outfitting them and sending them to different parts of the state. Yet the news keeps coming back that they aren't making very much progress. When the command team meets to figure out what is going wrong, they realize their problem is that they are fighting fires, yet their job is to put fires out. And they simply aren't putting any fires out. They decide to stop fighting every fire in the state. They list all the fires and select the one that will be the easiest to put out with the available resources. Then they move to the next easiest fire, and so on. In this way, they can send their crews where they will be the most impactful. For the first time, they start to put fires out. Their shift in strategy isn't easy. The hardest part is to let some fires go. The crews have been working hard to keep these fires checked, and now they are told that the Forest Service is going to let those fires rage uncontrolled, with the crews transferred elsewhere. It feels like a betrayal. Friendships are broken, some permanently. A few fires are left burning through the fall into winter. Some fires, like the ones at Klein, have gotten so hot that when the spring arrives, they spontaneously start up again. This time, the crews can finally go after them. Unlike these wildland firefighters, most teams have trouble correcting their problems. Teams can sometimes go too far in the opposite direction, tying themselves up in an attempt to over-control. To illustrate a team that did not know how to manage itself, we turn again to our favorite target, the crisis management teams. Example 14.6, the crisis management team that loved to caucus. The crisis manager has obviously been on teams where things have gotten out of hand and is determined to keep a tight rein. He informs the team that they will caucus regularly so everyone can stay informed. His strategy sounds reasonable, except that he doesn't know what he is doing. During the first 3 hours of the scenario, as the crisis swirls around, the crisis manager stands up and loudly announces, "Caucus," interrupting everyone at work. He calls for a caucus every 9 minutes on the average. I am timing him. To make matters worse, he lets the caucus ramble on, and then trail off, and usually doesn't announce it is over. People just start to go back to their work. The unit with the toughest job is the security force. They are constantly on the telephones, trying with limited success to talk with people they want to reach. And just as they are making contact, the leader calls for a caucus, and they have to hang up. Then the leader asks if they have spoken with so-and-so, and they admit they haven't, so the crisis manager berates them and calls more caucuses to check on their progress. Sometimes leaders become frustrated by the job of managing the team's progress, diagnosing its problems, and taking corrective actions. We've seen leaders disengage in many ways. Disengage? Jeez. Example 14.7, the leader who vanished. The job of the team is to develop a plan over the 2.5 days scheduled for the work. The problem is that 2 or 3 members insist on dominating the discussion, and the other members are ignored. Worse, the discussions are so chaotic that some members simply leave the room and wander over to another team meeting in parallel. The team leader is frustrated by his inability to create an orderly atmosphere, yet each time the free-for-all starts, he is one of the people fighting hardest to give his own speeches. On the last day, we are scheduled to work in the morning and give our briefing after lunch. The morning session is more of the same. Around 10 a.m., we take a break and then reassemble for the final discussion. We wait for the leader, but he doesn't come back. One hypothesis is that he has gone up to his room to take a nap. We call, but he has already checked out. Another hypothesis is that he has taken a walk outside the hotel and has gotten mugged. If that hasn't happened, his luggage will still be in the hotel. We check, but his luggage isn't there. A third hypothesis is that he has been murdered by someone on the team who cannot face yet another session together. This one has some plausibility. The motive is believable, and a murderer might be smart enough to hide the leader's luggage. The fourth hypothesis is that he is fed up. Excuse me, I need a drink. Been going way too long. Okay, so the fourth hypothesis is that he is fed up and has flown back to California without telling anyone. I call him the following week, and that was the case. So the guy just upped and left. He couldn't take it anymore. He poisoned the well of his own organization by, I guess, dominating all the discussions that he kept prompting everyone to join. It's like being called to do your job and then someone just butts in and does it for you. It's so strange. It's like a mini betrayal. It feels like a total mismanagement, and you can feel it. Those are some of the worst workplaces where there's a total mismanagement going on. There, and it's like a mismanagement of expectations as well as personnel. It's like you're told to do something and then you find out it's already been done or someone's already doing it. It feels like you could just have gone home. It feels like you're wasting your energy, you're wasting your breath, even talking about it, even bringing it up to your boss, like, hey, that's already being done. It's such a terrible feeling. It drops the morale and it's almost like a death blow. It's like rot. You can sense it. It's like the smell of death in an organization that does that constantly. Mismanagement it's a poison. It's usually fatal. This was a situation where metacognition was needed to change the way the team was doing business, but the leader did not know how to provide the metacognition. The continual interruptions and posturing that made it so hard to work together also prevented us from finding a better way to structure our discussions. One of the central functions of metacognition is to detect strains in the other aspects of teamwork and make adjustments. Competencies are linked to team identity because until a team develops to a certain level of proficiency, it may have trouble getting the members to identify themselves with the output of the entire team. As the team develops a stronger identity, the team members will monitor each other and help each other out in ways that improve the coordination of basic tasks naturally. Competencies are linked to team cognition because they serve as a limiting factor. As long as the team members are still struggling with basic procedures, they will not be able to pay sufficient attention to larger issues such as situation awareness. As they develop a better sense for time horizons and managing uncertainty, they will find that performance of basic procedures becomes smoother. And team identity is linked to team cognition because a stronger identity helps a team determine if their goals are congruent and if they have a shared situation awareness. It's like a flow state for a team. As the cognitive processing of the team matures, the individuals gain a stronger sense of identity. We can use these ideas about a team mind to examine one of the mysteries, of the USS Vincennes shootdown, described in Chapter 6. The captain was monitoring the battle with the surface ships while the Airbus was approaching. At a critical point, the captain asked, "What is 4474 doing?" referring to the original track number used to designate the Airbus, forgetting that it had been changed to 4131. Some crew members punched 4474 into their keypad and found that the airplane currently using that track number was descending. Others used the correct number, 4131, and found the airplane was ascending. In the confusion and ambiguity that followed, the captain made the decision to shoot down the unknown airplane. Something did not happen during the sequence. When the captain asked, "What is 4474 doing?" no one corrected him. Some crew members knew that the track number had been changed, but did not remind the captain. If they had, the decision might have been different. As a result, the inconsistent use of track numbers stayed at the preconscious level, where it was inaccessible to scrutiny. There were so many causes contributing to the accident that we cannot single out one and say this is where the team went wrong. But it certainly did not help to have an uncorrected mistake that led half the team to claim the airplane was descending. There were several possible reasons that no one corrected the captain. Maybe no one realized the mistake. Maybe the crew members who remember the change did not understand the implications of letting the error stand. Most likely, some did notice the error, but adhered to the U.S. Navy culture of not correcting a superior officer. Other naval accidents have been documented where crew members failed to inform a captain of an error he was making. The purpose of the concept of a team mind is to help us see the team and not be distracted by the individuals. A team can have a poor leader, but if others compensate, the job will still get done. Or the team may have brilliant individuals who get so caught up in debate that the job does not get done. If we are evaluating a team, we can try to ask how mature it is. If the team was a child, how developed would that child be? Is he or she still clumsy at basic procedures, or has it gotten them down pat? Is the child able to think effectively, or does it get stumped or even overloaded with ideas? Is the child aware of self, or does it have no idea about the way he or she is working? By looking at the team as a thinking, breathing organism, we can get a different appreciation of its abilities. The chaotic nature of the team mind. The team mind often functions in an accidental manner. That is, teams do not reliably follow one idea with its successor, and action-directed teams do not regularly have a clear idea of the reasons for their actions. The word chaotic refers to the observation that teams usually do not think in systematic and predictable ways. Their ideas and flow of attention are unpredictable. They have a delusion of controlling their own thoughts and their own actions, and sometimes the ideas control the team. It becomes a parasite. It becomes more important than the team itself. They are possessed by the idea. You see this so clearly with ideologically possessed organizations like Google. Their main mission statement is to produce software that people can use to search and network with other people and create documents and create calendars. Google Fiber is supposed to deliver information to people. It's all about information at the end of the day. That's what IT is, information technology. But It's all about information transfer, information control, and information transformation, information distribution, stuff like that. And they've lost sight of it. A lot of it is about censorship now. And I know my the replays are going up on YouTube, and I have to limit my speech. I have to self-censor because I know that Google is in control of the data that I'm producing. Now, I could go and put these replays on Rumble. I know they'll get less viewership because the information will be seen by less people on Rumble. Now that balance is changing. I know more and more people are signing up for Rumble every day. The calculus is changing. I could censor a little bit less and hope that I don't get banned. And because there's an alternative, hey, maybe I can still survive. Maybe my replays will go on to be watched by many, many people still, even though it's banned on YouTube because they're up on Rumble. But it's the self-censorship. It's this idea that some information is bad or harmful. It's about the idea of disinformation or hate speech, the idea that there's information that could harm people. These ideas have taken precedent over an organization like Google, and it's about the team. He's telling you it's about the team, letting the idea control the actions. And that's looking at it from a what would you call it? That's the charitable analysis. That's the analysis that Google's not they're not founded. The team members aren't pursuing this ideological bent. That's just saying that they're inhabited by these ideas. But we all know what the real case is. We all know that the people that work at Google have some kind of religious fatwa against America in general. So, and Americans. It's about the people. It's not so much about the place because they just think it's an idea. They think it's a marketplace. They think it's like a big shopping mall where they can just set up shop and just make infinite money off of the backs of Americans and the American economy. So we know what they truly think, but the charitable aspect is like looking at it from a different analysis, and we can pretend for a moment that it's just they're just inept. It's a skill issue, but we know it's not. We know it's a little bit deeper than that. Anyways, unpredictable ideas like the one I just had. Unless the leaders of a team deliberately stage a meeting, it is virtually impossible to figure out in advance what ideas are going to be brought forward. What gets entered into collective consciousness is only a small part of what all the team members are thinking about. There are many good ideas that never get spoken, and many good ideas that could be combined into real breakthroughs. Excuse me. None of the team members can know what the others have not said, so the team is unaware of what it misses. Unpredictable flow of attention. In most operational settings, teams are exposed to all sorts of interruptions and distractions. In his observations at Fort Hood, Marvin Thordson made a transcript of the 5-hour planning session, then counted how many times one element, one thought, was followed by a related one. Of the 64 segment transitions he identified, only 5 were categorized as natural transitions. Another 26 transitions could be seen as having been within the context of the discussion segment. More than half of the transitions, or 33 of the 64, were unconnected. They were total non sequiturs. The most common category, out of context questions, accounted for 19 transitions, 30% of all transitions. The planning became diverted to new unrelated topics for a variety of irrelevant reasons. Someone would receive a phone call, or a messenger would tell them they needed to use transparencies for their briefing, and they turned to a discussion of where they were going to make the transparencies. More important, Marvin thought that once the interruption was dealt with, the team usually did not return to its original discussion. It moved on to a different topic. The flow of the discussion was driven by random associations people brought up, not by an agenda. The delusion of controlling their own thoughts. After the fact, team members may describe their interactions as consistent and well-directed. Once they know what approaches they arrived at, they can trace how those approaches evolved and make the story seem tidy and coherent. However, the observers watching them struggle to find any approach, decision, or course of action about how the blind alleys, the stumbling, and the confusion took place. Interruptions. Even when interruptions do not come from the outside, the team makes its own distractions. One person has just read an interesting article and wants the others to look at it. Another person wants to know how to fill out the new timesheets. The process resembles free association. There is a general expectation that one person's comments will be marginally related to the preceding comments. In the short run, members find or make up connections between the comments and the preceding ones. However, these connections can be varied and tenuous. The members will often wonder how they got on the topic at all. In immature teams, even an agenda may not be sufficient to keep the discussion on track. The delusion of controlling their actions. Often in our observations of a team, a meeting would be ending and someone, usually the leader, would say something like, "Okay, I think we've talked that over long enough. Now let's go out and do it." These comments struck us as odd in cases where no one had defined what the team was supposed to do. Nevertheless, the team members were satisfied to pack up their pads and materials and prepare to swing into action. When asked later, they had trouble describing their goals. Once the action started, the team members took their cues from what others were doing, adjusting and coordinating on the spot. Afterward, when the team leaders see what they have achieved, they can try to weave an explanation showing how their activities were aimed in this direction all the time. Research in neurophysiology has shown that individuals can have the delusion that they are controlling their own thinking when this is not the case. To illustrate this delusion of controlling the actions taken, consider the following example. Example 14.8, the illusion of rationality. The neuropsychologist Michael Gazzaniga, and that's Gazzaniga, in 1985, conducted a study of patients whose uncontrollable epilepsy was so severe that the treatment was to cut the connections between the two hemispheres of the brain so the epileptic seizures would not have a path for spreading throughout the brain. Working with these patients individually, Gazzaniga presented a written... Dude, the name literally looks like Gaza nigga. I know I shouldn't say it like that, but it's too on the nose. Gazzaniga presented a written message to the visual field that fed into the right hemisphere, asking the patient to perform some simple act, like standing up and walking around. Next, he presented a written message to the left hemisphere, which controls speech, asking the person why he or she was walking around. Invariably, the person could make up an answer, such as, I just felt like stretching my legs, or I felt thirsty and wanted to find a Coke. The left hemisphere could not know the true reason for the action, but it showed no hesitation in making up a plausible reason. One speculation is that we have some sort of rational engine whose job it is to observe our behaviors and make inferences about rational causes. That's pretty remarkable. You can split someone's brain down the middle. You can show an image to their left eye, which is supposedly connected to the left hemisphere, separately from a message that you show to the right eye. And you can interrogate the different hemispheres, and you will get conflicting answers from each hemisphere of the brain. That's pretty crazy. Very unintuitive, very spooky that we're not totally in control of our conscious behaviors. If individuals can form a delusion of rational control over their own actions, we should not be surprised to find teams doing the same thing. Ideas that control the team. Skilled rowers refer to phenomenon they call swing, in which all 4 or 8 rowers catch the water at the same instant, and it feels as if the boat has gone flying out of the water. The rowers stop worrying about their individual actions and try to synchronize their movements to gain the power of coherent focus, like light waves that become lasers when they are brought into coherence. During a team meeting, when individuals are waiting for an opening to speak and preparing what they will say, it sometimes happens that an idea is articulated that captures everyone's attention and refocuses the discussion. We can say that the idea captured the team. It brought the thoughts of the team into coherence. This usually does not last very long, and in most meetings, it does not happen at all. When it does occur, it offers a glimpse of the team mind. I've been using the concept of an individual's mind to understand team decision making. Now I want to use what we have learned about teams to make more sense of our own individual minds, with team interactions as a metaphor for thinking. The next time you are in a group or take part in a team discussion, consider the possibility that you may be seeing the way your own mind works from the inside. The chaos, the accidents, the inhibited thoughts, the chance connections, the serendipity. That is what is going on inside your own head. You do not realize it because we cannot bring to consciousness all the fluctuations in our own brains. We cannot become aware of the thoughts we suppress. Our thinking usually looks so orderly, so purposeful, so clean. Watching a team think is perhaps the closest we will get to being inside a mind. Each of the accidental characteristics of team cognition listed above also seems to describe individual minds, resembling features of our own thinking. Now we have a way of appreciating how accidental the formation of new ideas is. We can be amused at our delusions that we always think clearly, controlling the flow of our thoughts and rationally controlling our actions. We can understand how thoughts can be generated and actions taken without any general awareness of the dynamics of a situation. We can know how different lines of thought can go on in silence and in parallel until one is ready to enter into consciousness. We can see how the other line of thought never gains awareness at all. All right, we've reached the applications of the chapter. All that's left is the applications and the key points. So we've got how to apply it and what we learned, essentially. And then we can get out of here. If anybody wants to request to speak, if you think you'll add to the discussion, if you want to ask a question about the book or talk about something related, feel free to request. And if I think you'll add to the conversation, I can bring you guys up. So feel free to interject. I'm going to keep reading, but you're more than welcome. Applications. The impetus for studying teams and for the team mind concept was to develop ideas for training. We found an interesting disconnect about training in many organizations we studied. Let me bring up Guido Austin. Let's see. Approve. All right, Guido Austin, you have the floor. Can you hear me?
Yo.
Yo, what's going on?
What's going on, NJ?
Nothing much, man. Just reading Thinking Fast. Oh my God.
Yeah, no.
How crazy is that? I just said Thinking Fast and Slow. Reading Sources of Power. We were chatting with Chief Trumpster earlier, so
yeah,
it's just been a lot of reading for a while. But yeah,
I'm appreciating this one. I actually went back to YouTube and watched one of the chapters because I was enjoying Sources of Power. This chapter, though, the teamwork stuff, I'm glad you put in that Pareto principle because some of these were just systems. You know what I mean? It's like this romanticizing of the teamwork concept when they're talking about just straight systems. Like you could just code every person on this, every person with like a single individual unique function, like distinct function. You could just code that person out of it, right? So having the example of them being on a team is useless. So I think you did a better job actually of illustrating the author's points than the author did, at least in the first half of the chapter.
Yeah, I think people get caught up in the theory. They get caught up in like, yeah, so we can just like organize people, right? We can just make sure that everyone's talking when they should be and not talking when they shouldn't be. And if
Yeah,
they just maintain their roles and remember their position in the team, everything will flow and it'll be like a flow state. And it's like, if you remember that only 10% of people are doing 90% of the work, it's like, all right, well, now it depends on who's doing the work. Now it's like there's a
exactly.
hierarchy that's involved, and it's more than just simple like management. It's not like a, well, are we mismanaging or managing? It's a little bit different. It's like who's managing? It's like, is it the
Right.
guy with all the experience that's managing? Is it the guy who's been around for 40 years? Or yeah, it gets a little bit more complex. This is like this is like a rosy picture. This is like if you lived in a vacuum, yeah, how would you manage a team and how does the team mind work? But yeah, there's more to it. You gotta take the context into play here. Like, what's your team like, and what are the effects of teamwork in the real
Yeah.
world?
Yeah, it's like the boss says, it's all about the who, right? But a lot of this like teamwork that they're talking about is like consensus building, like this very feminine type of I'm trying to not go too crazy. We're on YouTube. I'm trying to repeat that
No,
to
you're cool,
myself.
man. You're good. I'm okay with taking a few risks, but
All
I
right.
think I know what you mean. Like he's been talking about this like building rapport, and he's talking
Yeah,
about like this like social cohesion. And a couple times I did feel like that. I felt like it was like a HR type view of it.
exactly, exactly. Yeah, I was picturing situations that I've been in where it's just like I like Deion Sanders said this once, like when he's returning punts, he just wishes all his team members would just fall down so that there would be like 11 or 10 less players on the field that he had to like worry about, which is like a very arrogant, people got mad at him when he said that. But as a former kick returner, like I totally understood that. Like I was like, yes, thank you for saying that. Because like, and that's how I felt. I've kind of been a bad team player at times or accused of being a bad team player on teams because I'm just like, you're useless, do nothing, don't bother me, you know. And you can probably relate to that. I know I assume you're very good at what you do. So it can be teams can be like either you have distinct jobs that don't overlap. At least when you're doing like development stuff, you have distinct jobs that don't overlap and complement each other well. But if there's two people trying to do the same thing, it's like one of them just needs to get out of the way.
Yeah, I think that's like sort of outside the scope here. So I
Yeah, yeah,
understand why he's not getting into that. But yeah, I totally get what you mean. There was like a certain aspect of this chapter where he's talking about like I think he was talking about like the group awareness or like the metacognition and like when they should know when to behave a certain way or like when to get back on track and stuff. And I think that's very useful. And then he gets into like uh, the team mind is like an organism. It's like a living, breathing
yeah.
organism. It's like a brain. And I'm like, maybe it's not the best analogy. Maybe he could have chosen a better analogy. I think that's like the limiting factor here. So I maybe like with more thought, we could come up with a better analogy. Um, I get why he chose it. It's like totally on brand for him to talk about the brain and like
Yeah, and
the
it fit with the
psychology.
rest of the chapters. You're exactly right. It fit with the rest of the chapters. It like it's almost like he wrote the introduction last in a way to like tie everything together because anything that was worth anything in the chapter was in the second half, I think.
Yeah. I'm getting a lot out of this book. There's just I feel like I'm glossing over a lot of stuff. I end up like just discarding it as like
Yes.
it's useful for some people, and I think it truly is useful for like truly corporate stuff, like where
Yes. Yeah.
it probably is useful for like fireground commanders and the Navy, where like and I know Wendell's here now. I was talking with Chief Trumpster about which book I'm going to read next, and I want to read either Relentless Strike or Private Truths and Public Lies. And Relentless Strike, I remember Wendell talking about this in his marathon space. It's all about the application of these two researchers, Gary Klein and
Yep.
oh my gosh, Kahneman. It's about the two researchers and the metacognition and how that applies to in the field and like the thinking of these military groups and stuff like that. So yeah, like it probably does apply in those situations where it's like rapidly changing situations. It's high stakes. There's not a lot of information. It's limited, and you have to make decisions in the field. There's not a lot of like command and control that's able to like direct everything. It's not a lot of micromanaging. It's like these guys out doing what they got to do on their own. Yeah, I could see how this would play out, but in terms of like how this is going to apply for me, it just sounds like HR. It just
Yeah.
sounds like HR.
Well, I appreciate you chumming the water for Wendell to bite, but dude,
Yeah,
I've never heard of Relentless Strike, other than I guess what you just said, but public, I always get this back right. Public Truth, Private Lies is a book I've been wanting to read for a while, so I'll cast half a vote for that with the caveat that
yeah.
Relentless Strike might be really good. I just don't know much about it.
Me neither. I brought Wendell up, but real quick before Wendell goes off, Chief and I did talk about it, and we're leaning towards Private Truths and Public Lies because we both think it's a more interesting concept. I'm not really a military guy, so I can't say that the Relentless Strike thing interests me. But hey, I'm Wendell. Whenever you want to speak, feel free. Guido, I'm going to leave you up here. You can jump in whenever you want.
It's not Relentless Strike. It's The Mission, The Men, and Me by Pete Blaber. That's the
Damn,
one
did I really
I'm
get that
talking
wrong?
about. Yeah, yeah.
I'm cooked. It's been so long since that space, man.
If you started reading Relentless Strike, you'd just get like 20 years of military history. So yeah, you wouldn't really be in the, there's probably some crossover, but no, Blaber's book is that was like a puzzle piece. I'd read that probably 2 years before reading these books. And then I realized who he was talking about and where he was getting these techniques from. So, um, yeah. And, it's funny to hear what you were just saying to Guido Austin. I'm relatively sure I said it in passing about this book, but the way I qualify Sources of Power is that it was like a checklist. Like I was reading it and it wasn't for me, and I wasn't really learning anything in it. It was interesting, but I wasn't learning anything in it. The same went for Csikszentmihalyi's Finding Flow. This is like the flow state creator, and so that's how you know you're doing something right. You get this off the tip of the spear thinking checklist, and then you read these books and they're not useful to you. You are passing a test. You are passing several tests that were whipped up by, Jewish cognitive.
Guido, can you hear me?
Yo, I
I
lost
think
the space for a second.
yeah, I think Wendell crashed out. I'm gonna try and bring him back up. I just want to make
Cool.
sure I'm still connected. Okay, if you guys can hear me, that's good. Wendell, if you can hear me when you reconnect, I just request I'll bring you back up. Damn, it's always Wendell, man. Nobody else has any problems in my spaces. If you go back and listen to these replays, man, every single time it's Sources of Power spaces, and Wendell joins, and he can't, it drops
They
out,
have the
man.
NSA super tech on Wendell, man.
Dude, it is.
He's too powerful.
They can't let him speak.
Was. No,
Let
no, no.
him
Do
speak.
you know what that
Let
was?
him.
That was that's I'm on the iPhone and I set a time limit for Twitter. And
Oh
it
man.
just totally fucks up Twitter. No, every time it stops, every time it says like, okay, you got to go, time's up. Like even if you come back in, like if you were watching a video, it won't continue or work. I couldn't get back into the space, so that's all it was. But no, I just wanted to say
Okay, okay.
if you're reading these books and you're just like, oh, this is boring, this isn't for me. That was so funny when Book Cat read. This was probably like 2.5 years ago. probably early winter 2022, when Bookcat was reading Mearsheimer's The Tragedy of Great Power Politics. He's like, oh, this is boring. Like, everybody should know this stuff. And it's like, okay, well, this is a good sign, right? like if you're bored by a work that that totally blows the minds of normal people and is considered like a genre classic, it says something about you and not the text, but you won't know until you're reading it. It's also a good reason to think about the impact of what you're reading is having on you. But yeah, I thought that was funny hearing you guys say that. Like, oh, this is all just like this is all just kind of boring stuff. Blaber has this umbrella term in Mission the Men and Me for all this cognitive psychology stuff these Jews were just pumping into his mind at Delta Force. And he just puts it under the broader rubric of smart guy solutions, smart guy stuff. And so that's what he calls all this stuff in the book. Like whenever he starts like using his imagination to think about how they're going to try and kidnap a war criminal, or thinking about while the generals are too busy doing nothing but video conferencing in the early days of the Afghanistan invasion, just how to terrorize Al Qaeda, you know, like how to come up with little minimal attempts that have big impacts to just fuck with their minds. He just calls that smart guy solutions. But yeah, once I read Klein, and I read Kahneman first and then Klein from that, and it's like, okay, this is exactly who he's talking about. So not surprising, given the role of those forces initially was just to protect Jewish tourism. I think I posted in a group chat earlier. I saw it was early this morning. I saw a thread on here, and they're like, "Here was a
Yo,
crazy cruise from the Queen Elizabeth II from
that was so
1973."
crazy.
And they're like, and then in the second tweet, it's like, and they're like, oh, 26 British special boat service operators came on board the big cruise ship, and it was the first operation of its kind. And then they're like, second tweet, they're like, it was the 25th anniversary of Israel, and there was a cruise from London to Israel that was privately chartered to celebrate it. And I was like, see? So anyway, no, that's all I
Bro, and
wanted
they
to say
had they
about.
had 26 travel agents. I was wondering how many passengers were on the ship. Like probably was it even 25? I don't even
Dude,
know.
can
Was
you
half the
imagine
ship
how?
spooks?
Do you imagine having your assigned? I don't know if you guys have ever been on a fancy cruise, but they assign you dinner seating. They for like social purposes. You sort of mix, to mix up all the passengers and get them talking to each other. It's like, dude, imagine chilling with the. I guess it's like what the city of London. What do they call that row there, where all the first banks popped up after Jews were let back in 1688, the Glorious Revolution. Oh man, I can't remember what it's called. It's named after where they were hiding out in Italy for a couple hundred years before they got thrown out of Spain. Come on, what's that one? Is it with a V or something? No. Anyway, I can't remember. I'm not the super city of London guy. I haven't gotten to 1688 yet. Obviously, I've been spending too much time in the 1970s in the books. But yeah, so it makes sense that these guys would be calibrated by their masters. But anyway, like I said, if you're reading a book that everybody's like, you have to read this book, I have to literally force these concepts into my workers' heads at gunpoint, or like hold their fucking rest of their career over their head, like, hey, buddy, this is an elite big five intelligence agency analytic tradecraft workshop. This is the top of the line for an enlisted guy in the NGA. If you can't read these fucking books and monkey see, monkey do, I'm gonna kick you back down the ladder, and you won't reenlist. Like this stuff is for figuring. You guys got it. You're just denigrating it. You forgot to make the discovery, right? You're like, oh, this stuff is stupid. Like that's not actually how this stuff works. This is for like making 115 IQ people work in harmony with one another. That's what it's for. It's not for the smart guy. He's the one that takes 2 days off when he tags Danny Kahneman or Gary Klein to come in and nose around the office and get everybody in the conference room. That's when you're taking like 2 days off to go to your, kids' baseball tournament or whatever. So this is for managers. And managers will read it and they'll be like, I didn't need to read this. And they're like, yeah, but I want your whole staff to read this and I want everybody who works for you to read it. And you're like, oh, okay, all right. Okay, can I just bring this guy in? Like, I don't know if Blaber talks about it much, but some of these other Delta Force guys will write memoirs and they'll be like, we just would bring in, when we needed to learn how to ride dirt bikes, we just hire a former motocross champion. When we needed to learn how to break into safes, and we'd never be very good at it because we just get like a 1 weekend training course or something, we'd bring in a guy that the FBI keeps out of prison because even though he's a criminal, he's like useful sometimes, right? We'd bring in a guy who could like feel a feather on the other end of a safe dial with his fingers, like that guy from YouTube that can feel the post-it notes or something inside the safe against the dial lock. So you got to remember, like, a lot of where this stuff intersects with not just national security, but any kind of high performing teams, is that in the private sector, time is money. And that's how Kahneman wins a Nobel for the work that in part he did with Klein. In the government sector, it's about zero failure. It's that, not that just that lives are at stake, but if, as in the case of that one British hostage, Linda, what's her name, if a development group guy forgets under pressure that you're on a hostage rescue mission and maybe you shouldn't clear rooms, like you're in Baghdad going up against the first day in Fedayeen Saddam entrenched elite forces, and you shouldn't throw a fragmenting grenade, a regular hand grenade into a room, then that's an international crisis. That's a super embarrassing incident. And so getting rid of the little cognitive quirks that plague no fail missions, because they're trying to figure out how to create the first no fail mission. They're trying to figure out how to free all the hostages at Entebbe, but not lose Netanyahu's oldest brother. They're trying to figure out how to do all this stuff for the first time. So you got to remember, this stuff was being explained in reverse. Guido, you made a discovery without realizing it. Yeah, of course, the introduction's written at the end of the book. I had a sensible boomer chuckle when I heard you come up with that. Of course. Wait till you guys find out how many people it takes to write a book. But when these guys are talking about the previous decades of their professional life and they're assembling them together, these are kinds of memoirs. So they're talking about systems that you guys are probably starting to inhabit in the workforce, probably like Fortune 100 level standards in, say, 2020 and later. These guys started to develop the techniques to determine the manpower capable, the human capital capable of meeting those standards in the 1990s. So you guys are reading books about the 1970s through the 1990s. So these practices seem old and out of date because to your standards they are. But I think I brought up this anecdote the last time I called into this space. When I was looking at the background on Kahneman's work and where it's being cited, found some PDF from from the 1980s for the CIA's analytical department that they had cleared. And the forward was from like 40 years later. It was from right around now. And the guy was complaining, he'd written it, that, he had read all this work while it was in the academic stage, while it was being published in journals, and tried to get the CIA to implement some of it to clean up some of their analysis. And it had never happened. And he was like, the forward of this work from like 1980, from 40 years later, was we could just go in and teach this right now. Like, no one is picking up on this, no one is using it. So a lot of it just misunderstands the purpose of intelligence agencies to the executive, which is just to provide the answer that the president needs. It's not to create the truth. It's not to tell him what's really going on. It's to give him an entire agency worth of ass covering for a decision he already is compelled to make for other reasons that are outside of their domain. So that's where like the fundamental gap is between management and worker bee implementation and execution of these ideas. But it's funny to hear you guys pick up on that. I would say, I mean, maybe it's a way to get other people to think and read about this stuff, that you have to remind yourself. I always remind you guys when I call in these spaces that these books are important because they explain the way like big elite Ivy League shitlib world works. These are part of their codex. Like these books and these ideas launch financial funds. They are found in boardroom meetings. They are, in like the Obama summer playlist level of like elite orthodoxy. It's not so you can necessarily learn about all this stuff. It's so you can see the little footprints of how these ideas take hold of people and worm their way through society and understand what trick is being played when the card is pulled, and you have some other solution, you have some other way around that. So it's kind of like that Gavin DeBecker book, Gift of Fear. I saw someone go through all like the warning signs of that yesterday. There was some video where they were going over Miss Frazzled or whatever, this really cringy woman from the White Women for Harris campaign video call that uses peaceful parenting. Oh, excuse me, Freudian slip. Friendly parenting or whatever it was called, gentle parenting, and it's just condescending female shit. And they're like, oh, she's hitting all the marks from DeBecker's book. DeBecker made all his money and fame defending celebrities from stalkers. It's like a professional bodyguard guy, like a manager of bodyguards, knowing that the signs people exhibit are a lot more important than being like big enough to take a rifle bullet or something like that. Like maybe you should get them to move or something instead of get run over in their driveway by a crazy woman. On and on. But that's another reason you read those books. You may already know all those signs. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I would be freaked out too. That's just a check. But exploitative behavior has calling cards. And if in the case of these best-selling books, millions of people have been instructed to varying degrees, like you guys were talking about, who's actually going to do this stuff, blah, blah, blah. That's another question. But if elites are being instructed at the junior staff level 20 years before they go on to govern companies or institutions in these techniques, now you know where they came from. But yeah, I would also say definitely read Karan's book next. That's a really good one, very interesting. And he's tweeting, so he gets a lot of mileage out of his own ideas on here. But all right, anyway, I'm going to sign off now, but thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Thanks for coming up, Wendell. Yeah, I'm glad you corrected me on that. I was going to keep saying Relentless Strike. That's crazy. Dude, it's been so long. Yeah, so what was that? That was like 2022. That was right before. Yeah. Jeez, man. Because the Yay stuff had just happened. That's how long back I was trying to remember the book names. I should have just rewatched the Marathon Space, but I don't know when you talked about those books. But yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. I am going to read that book next. The Private Truths, Public Lies one. But yeah, I've been using this book as sort of like a checklist. I've been kind of, the vocabulary you gain from reading these things is probably the most important way that it like illuminates the dark parts of your mind. You're able to categorize things. You're able to classify different behaviors and different thought patterns. So that's probably been the biggest gain from it. Like you said, a lot of these things are just, it's passe at this point. It's totally institutional. It's natural, it's instinctive to act these ways and to think these ways. If you're any sort of professional, if you're any sort of competitive professional. So yeah, not super helpful in that sense. It hasn't like taught me too much, but it has illuminated the vocabulary. I can put words to the patterns. But yeah, that's been important. The other aspect, if I don't forget my train of thought, the the other aspect has been you could just shoot the shit with your boss and tell him all the cool stuff you read about. So I brought up some of the things from Thinking Fast and Slow to my boss, and he just eats it up, man. He's like, wow, I never thought of it that way. And I'm like, dude, you're my boss. Why haven't you thought of this? And then I realized he's older, and yeah, like that tracks with what you said. Like it is now, it's institutional, but when he was, in his formative years, maybe he didn't have this stuff at his disposal. It wasn't institutional for him and his generation. So yeah, it kind of leapfrogged them. It kind of beat the Gen Xers and the boomers. For a lot of those guys, it's only now institutional. the last 20 or so years. So yeah, we're like inculcated with this stuff. It's totally secondhand. It's natural. But yeah, boring, boring. Thinking fast and slow, boring. But yeah, I think if you get nothing else from it, you get the cool anecdotal stories about like the Vincennes and the weird national security threats that they go through, and how Israelis are observing the crisis management teams in America and like watching them handle nuclear fissile materials and stuff like that. Stuff you probably won't hear about unless you read weird memoirs like this. So it's been good for the anecdotal bits too. I can't throw those out either. But yeah, good recommendations. I'm really liking the tip of the spear stuff for the vocab. Totally recommend it on that part alone. So but yeah, if anybody else wants to come up and speak, feel free. But I'm going to continue reading. We're just at the, what was it? Sorry, let me open my Kindle. The applications and the key points of the chapter. We're right at the end. So if you want to come up and speak, now's the time. But let's get to the applications and we'll finish up chapter 14. Applications. The impetus for studying teams and for the team mind concept was to develop ideas for training. We found an interesting disconnect about training in many organizations we studied, particularly in the Department of Defense. Yes, like, again, these guys just get to study the DoD. Pretty crazy. Imagine some American just going over. Well, it's not the same. It's not the same. Imagine some Brazilian coming over and just studying the DoD. I don't think that's that might raise some eyebrows if it was like a Chinese guy. But it's like totally normal for Israelis to come over and do that. Some high-ranking officers insisted that they had already offered team training, while others admitted that this was one of their weak points. In trying to figure out the reason for the disconnect, we found it was based on an ignorance of what team training was. Team training requires a certain process. First, you must identify a set of functions and processes that teams should master within a given setting. Second, you must evaluate how well the teams in this setting perform those functions and processes. So know your team. Identify the processes, know your team. Identify any areas of weakness. Provide specific training in the form of exercises tailored to provide experience or remedy weakness. And I think that's the key points. The officers who were unhappy with team training knew that this type of training never occurred, yet no one tried to find out why teams went wrong and then design new scenarios to build the necessary skills. The officers who were satisfied that they trained teams meant that they trained people in situations where they had to work as teams. If a team fell apart, the observers might comment on the poor outcome, but not on what went wrong inside the team. These officers did not know that they could do more by examining a team's strategies or its competence. They didn't know what they did not know, so they were unaware that they were missing something. And it takes expertise to miss the gaps, as we read earlier. Once at the Army War College, I was talking about how the school could adapt its exercises to provide more focused team training. One instructor, a major, took exception to my comments. "How can you claim that we do not already know how to train teams?" he demanded. I replied, then finished my presentation. At the end, he still did not want to make any changes, but for a different reason. "What makes you think we can evaluate these team processes?" he demanded. "We need a lot more preparation than we've been given at this school." So it's about the the mismanagement that he received. He wasn't prepared. His team wasn't prepared. He didn't know his team. In working in different settings, we realized that lots of training exercises already went on involving teams. It would be easy to add some additional material and make these into directed team training opportunities. We could use the existing exercises for team decision training as well as for familiarity with the tasks themselves. One of the projects run by Caroline Zambach was to provide team decision training. This project was sponsored by the Army Research Institute. Our contract monitor, Owen Jacobs, wanted us to apply the ideas of the team mind to train high-ranking officers. And we worked out arrangements with the Industrial College of the Armed Forces, part of the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. The school trains officers at the rank of lieutenant colonel of the U.S. Army or Air Force, or captain in the U.S. Navy. Carolyn produced a module on advanced team decision-making that was adopted by the Industrial College of the Armed Forces. Under her leadership, we transformed the initial ideas about a team mind into a set of primary dimensions and key behaviors along the lines of the model, shown in Figure 14.2. This advanced team decision-making model has become part of the curriculum of the college's course on strategic decision-making. They literally influence the curriculum. So the studies that they were doing, like Wendell said, in the 70s and 80s, they finally put it into practice. They had been doing these studies for like 20 years. And, they did their analyses in the 90s. And finally, in like the early and late 1990s, they're able to apply these things. And the Army Research Institutes and the industrial colleges, they're able to apply these because they need it. They need management. They need management that can train these people as teams. And no one had the vocab. No one had the research to be able to do it properly. And how do you get funds and grants? How do you ask the government for money to do these things? How do you get the green light? Well, you got to show them a white paper. You got to show them like the stack of papers that's like, yeah, we did our research, man. Now give us the money, fork it over. Point the money hose right at me, okay? Let me go on my vacation. This advanced team decision-making model has become part of the curriculum. The faculty wanted its students to learn how to observe teams in action and make adjustments on the spot. It also wanted the students to anticipate difficulties and to make the necessary changes and preparations in advance. We've used this team decision-making model in other domains, such as emergency response organizations set up by nuclear power plants. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or the NRC, requires each nuclear power plant to set up an emergency response organization that evaluates periodically. Members of the emergency response organization have primary jobs in the plant and usually come together only for drills. In 1995, Duke Power Company hired Klein Associates, that's pretty funny, to study the team decision-making in the emergency response organization of one of its nuclear power generating stations. Dave Klinger led the project, which included an independent consultant, Doug Harrington of Team Formation. They used the advanced team decision-making model as a diagnostic tool, so like a checklist. They observed drills and interviewed several people in each of the key positions. Because the emergency, I'll just say that a little bit slower. My caffeine's kicking in right now. Because the emergency response organization must always be on call to activate, several people fill each position. The primary difficulties were that the crews were not clear about their roles and functions, and they were having trouble maintaining a shared situation awareness. Dave and Doug worked with the teams to redefine the roles and functions and to redesign the workspace layout in the emergency response organization. Another change was to conduct afternoon reviews to cover team decision making. During the project, more than 50 changes were recommended in organizational structure processes and the physical environment of the emergency center. Over the 10 months that this project took, Dave and Doug drastically reduced the number of people in the emergency center. At first, there were more than 80 people crowded into one room. Because the workload was so heavy, Duke Power believed they needed to add even more people. This is the same problem that a lot of not so much startups, but think of like inexperienced managers or executives. They think that they can just throw money at the situation or hire more people. That's like the naive approach. But a lot of people don't realize that these tasks are done in series and not in parallel. It needs more time. It doesn't need more people. Too many cooks in the kitchen spoils the meal. It's not about that. It's about having the right person in the right role. It's about organizing the tasks to be done in the right order and at the right time, and prioritizing. That's like the main problem. There's usually like a bottleneck. There's like a choke point. And, adding more people to fit through the already thin doorway becomes a problem. It actually just stifles progress more. Dave and Doug found that the heavy workload was caused in part by having too many unnecessary people. They tried cutting out assistants and non-relevant staff, and performance got better. By the end of the project, the staff was down to 35, and workload had reduced, not increased. And that also talks to the Pareto principle that I mentioned earlier. 10% of your workforce is doing 90% of the work. That's just true in every organization. In addition to staff reduction, the station manager and emergency planning director decided to put many of the major recommendations in place shortly before their annual drill with NRC observers without a practice. We were nervous about this, but the previous history of difficulties had raised the possibility that the plant would have to increase the number of practice drills from 4 a year to 6 per year. Each drill can cost between $250,000 and $500,000, and go from 1 to 2 formally evaluated drills a year. Each of those is half to a full $1 million per drill. The plant personnel were highly motivated to do well. It's about profits. They don't read these stack of papers and they don't implement these drills because it makes them feel better. It helps them sleep at night. It's because they want to keep their jobs. They want to keep their jobs, okay? The reason people read these books is not because they want to like memorize everything and have the perfect checklist. It's because they want to keep their jobs. They want to move up the ranks and move up the ladder and get a nicer car and get the bigger estate. They want to have the second house. They want to have the house in the Hamptons. They decided to institute a new room layout. They placed individuals who must share information next to one another. They moved the status board so that all the major players at the command table could see it. It's amazing that these things weren't done already. They reorganized the board to show plant status, the status of the teams in the plant, the status of equipment, the most recent events, and current priorities. The status board, which had been ignored during previous drills, could now be used during briefings to describe the problems and how they were being addressed. One other major recommendation was the definition of expectations by the team leader. During the drill, but prior to activating the center, the emergency director went around the command table and described to each team member what was expected of him or her and what was not expected. Yeah, you have to be explicit with these guys. You have to be explicit with the office drones. Otherwise, they'll start sputtering out and do nothing, or they'll do too much, or they'll do what they're not supposed to do, or they'll forget what they're supposed to do. They'll go up and ask the guy who's supposed to be doing his job, what am I supposed to be doing? Grind the whole thing to a halt. That's the best way to do that. This placed the team in a position to move forward and handle the event without the crippling effects of redundant, ambiguous, and meaningless tasks and information. Was it worth it? There were several obvious differences. The room was noticeably quieter. Hey, so if you want a quiet office, you got to get your board up there. You got to make sure you're getting some guy up there writing what people, hey, this is what's going on. Sit rep. This is what's going on in the office. Then you don't have to have the office drones asking each other stupid questions all day. There was a shared perception that the problems presented in the drill were easier than in previous drills, whereas in actuality, the exercise was more challenging. The improved teamwork just made it seem easier because the team members were no longer getting in their own way. After watching the team in action, it's like horse blinders. It's a lot like horse blinders. It's like you get to see the board. You don't have to go talk to 10 other people to figure out what the fuck's going on. After watching the team in action, the NRC reduced the number of required drills at that plant down to 1 every 2 years and wiped the slate clean regarding previous deficiencies. Now the plant was held up as a model of how emergency response organization should work. Key points. We've reached the key points. This is just to remind you of the whole chapter that we just read, because we read like, I don't know, 40 pages. So he's going to condense it for us and remind us of what we just read. So get your notepads out. A team is an intelligent entity. The cognition of a team can be inferred from three sources: the team's behavior, the contents of the team's collective consciousness, and the team's pre-consciousness. The mind of a team shows some familiar features. It has a limited working memory. It has to store some information permanently. It has a limited attention span. It can process information in parallel, and it relies on filtered information. The team mind develops basic competencies and routines, forms a clear identity, and learns to manage the flow of ideas, and learns to monitor itself to adjust its thinking when necessary. And lastly, the idea of a team mind helps us understand the way individuals think, including the accidental nature of thinking. That's chapter 14. If anybody has any thoughts about this chapter, or any possibly related thoughts, or they want to ask a question, feel free to request. Otherwise, I'm going to get out of here. Otherwise, I'm going to call it a night. And if BookCat's still streaming, I'm going to go try and catch that. Probably not. I think I outlasted BookCat. I think I kept the marathon going like Chief Trumpster. Chief Trumpster put the onus on me. He's like, you can't end the space. Every time I bring him up, he's like, you can't end the space. You have to keep the content going. I can't make all the content. That's what he's implicitly saying. So, look, I'm a content creator. I'm just like him. Okay, I look at the TV and see Chief Trumpster, and I say he's just like me. Look, I'm on the TV. It's me. Look, Mom, I have a YouTube channel. But okay, nobody's requesting. I'm going to end the space. Thank you guys for listening, and everyone who came up to talk, Wendell, Chief Trumpster, and Guido Austin. Thank you for speaking. It always is more enjoyable with the discussion. So I'll catch you guys next time with chapter 15, the power of rational analysis and the problem of hyper-rationality. And thank you for listening once again, and have a good rest of your night.